Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, my entitled neighbor lied about the property boundary lines and claimed a part of my garden is on her property. She ends up hiring a company to cut down my expensive old tree. Here is what happened in this tree law story. I have a neighbor living next to me that is a Karen and the most entitled person I've ever had the displeasure of meeting. Most of the time it never involved me and would just be random things I would hear about. Like for one, she did not think it was fair that she had to bring the trash to the curb and felt like it was the garbage collector's job to go into her side yard and do it themselves. Not because she is disabled or anything, just because she is lazy. And there's also a husband and two sons that play contact football in the house, so I am sure somebody is physically able to do it. My property is larger than hers and she finds this to be totally unfair. I don't know what world she lives in where everything is the same size, but I would hate for her to see a map of the entire country. Anyway, she tried to go to the town and claim that the property line was wrong and that she was the real owner of a portion of my land. Before anything could even be decided, she was so cocky that she built a fence where she thought the right property boundary was. I was calm and knew to just wait for the town to tell her off and report the fence as being illegal and on my property. Karen then came to my house even and told me that if I was a good neighbor, I would let her have the land. When I told her no, she called me greedy and claimed that she needed it more than I did, but could not give a single reason why. Probably because she did not have one and just wanted more land to fit her ego in. Anyway, I was not too worried since I knew I was in the right and the town would sort things out without me needing to do much else. A real surveyor came and confirmed that there were no issues and the original line was still valid and my property was just bigger. She was ordered to have the fence removed and things would go back to normal. It was a fairly typical story and if it was the only thing that happened, it would not even be worth posting. I did not need to go into court and she didn't do anything too crazy or wacky. I figured she was just entitled and not insane. However, from the title of the story and the fact that there is a story, you know this is not where things end. A couple months later it was my kids' spring break from school and took time off so we could all go on vacation. I promised that if they both got good grades and did not get into any trouble, they could have as much input on the trip as me. It's a good system and makes it so things don't get too out of control and everybody has fun. We pick where we go and everybody gets to do their own research and pick activities. Now, we were meant to be gone for 6 days, but on the 4th day of the trip, I got a phone call. Despite being off from work, there were some issues and I had been getting the occasional email and phone call I could not ignore. I felt bad about it and assumed this call was another instance of that. Instead, when I picked up, I was connected to a lawyer's office that I never heard of before. My initial thought was somebody was in trouble or something. Me, hello? Lawyer, is this OP? Me, yes. Lawyer, we've been attempting to contact you at home for the past 3 days. After talking and having a hard time getting him to actually tell me what was going on, I got an answer. According to them, a tree on my yard damaged property and I was being sued for responsibility. They did not seem to care that I was on vacation and demanded that I come home and deal with the situation and get a lawyer of my own. There is nothing worse than having to tell your kids vacation is ending early. They did not deserve it, but they honestly handled it better than I expected. Maybe I just still see them as little kids, but they coming out just a little disappointed but not complaining made me think that I'm doing a decent job raising them. Anyway, I couldn't get any more details about what tree and what damage they were even talking about. It was not until I got home that I finally saw what everything was about. In my area, there are a lot of very old and very large trees, one of which is a white pine tree that is probably the biggest one in my yard. It stands on the side of my property between my house and Karen's house. This is a tree she has complained about multiple times for creating too much shade. It is a healthy and old tree that I wouldn't want to cut down in the first place. Even if I did, the laws about tree cutting here are very strict to avoid these old trees from being destroyed for no reason. Getting a permit to destroy a tree here basically has to show the tree is dead or shows danger of falling and causing damage. My tree was standing up tall and did not even have any low branches that could be an issue. The damage was that the white pine tree was down and smashed right over Karen's house. There was a ton of damage done to the roof and most likely other damage that I could not even see and would not be able to see until the tree was removed. Apparently, they were not going to remove it and instead waited for me to pay for its removal, also claiming that I had to give them money to stay at a hotel because it was unsafe to live in the house. So there were two big issues with their claim of my tree just falling and destroying their home. The first was that there was no kind of storm or high winds or anything that would cause the tree to go down. To my knowledge, a healthy tree does not just fall down anyway, but I'll admit I don't know much about trees. What I do know is that when the stump has a clear cut that seems to be made by a chainsaw and sawdust is all over the grass, something clearly went down. Trees might be able to fall, but they do not just cut themselves down. I had a strong idea of what happened here, and I was not gonna let Karen get away with it. I took pictures of everything just in case and got a lawyer. I made it clear right away that I was not going to settle or give Karen a dime to fix her house because I knew there was some foul play on her end. My lawyer sent theirs my response plus my photo evidence that the tree had been cut down and did not just fall like they had claimed. The back and forth went on for a while before we all figured nothing was going to get resolved and a judge would have to rule on which party was at fault for this issue. I guess the photos I sent caused them to change their story because in court suddenly things had changed drastically from the tree just falling over. According to Karen and her husband, I hired a company to cut down my tree without obtaining any types of permits. A company they claimed was most likely not even insured and did not use any safety precautions when taking the tree down. Then, when it fell on their house, they claimed the men ran away and I went into my house and refused to answer the door for them. All of this testimony had dates and of course pictures of the damages, as well as a bill for what they say it would cost to repair their house back into the state it was meant to be. They did not even realize that they had dug themselves into a hole that I was not gonna let them get out of. I had so many family photos and receipts from my trip that included things like the date, etc. It was clear without a doubt that we are not anywhere near the house when the tree was cut down, and I also had the original report of them claiming it fell, even though now they claim seeing the men cutting it down. My lawyer intimidated them a bit about it being illegal to lie on the stand, that if they were found to be lying instead of confessing, they could end up going to jail. I guess it was enough to scare them because it was Karen in the end that ended up cracking and finally telling the truth. Karen, okay fine, I hired them to come and cut down the stupid tree. But it was their property, so they should still be responsible for the damage that it caused. Lawyer, you want them to pay for damage done by their tree? Damage caused only because you hired a company without their consent to cut down the tree? Karen, they refused to cut it down when I asked. Lawyer, are you aware that a permit is required for any citizen to get a tree removed from their property? Karen, yes, I'm aware of that. Lawyer, did you obtain any type of permit for the tree removal? Karen, no. Lawyer, then there's no reason they should be responsible for the outcome. Karen was livid and muttering about how she would just pay for the repairs herself. That was not how things were going to end though, because there were more issues to solve. The first one being between Karen and the town, because she did not get a permit in order to get any work done on the tree. Also, they tracked down the company she hired and found that they were not licensed and claimed that Karen knew this and offered them money under the table to remove the tree. They swear Karen told them it was on her property, so it was not any kind of issue. So she was getting a huge fine from them. I was also countersuing her because of the damage she had done to my tree. It might sound dumb to some people, but you cannot just get another tree like that. I would have to buy a sapling and it would take more than my lifetime for it to get back to how it was before. There is a huge process that I personally learned about during this entire lawsuit. She'd have to pay me not for the sapling but for what the tree she illegally cut down would be appraised as being worth. This took into account the size of the tree, the estimated age of the tree, the condition, and even how high the branches were. I had zero clue this much went into tree appraisal, or even how the professionals figured some of this stuff out. Anyway, we were actually lucky that Karen did not bother to get the tree removed from her house though, because it gave him the ability to accurately measure it and get all the information right. The last thing taken into account was the rarity of the tree based on current population density. Maybe I'm just a nerd, but I found that entire thing a little bit amazing. At the end, me and my lawyer were consulted about a price to get for it. My jaw almost hit the ground when the arborist said it was worth around $240,000. You can be sure that I was suing Karen for every single penny of that. You can also be sure that she complained about the entire thing because of how much money it was gonna cost her to fix her home, and paying me meant that she wouldn't be able to fix her own home. She wanted to fix it first and give me whatever she might have left over afterwards. That was not the way things worked, and she instead had to pay me and pay for the stump to be removed first. I couldn't help but have to hide a grin when she finally realized she had lost. The first thing I did with the money I got was to get another white pine tree sapling and plant it on my property. It would not be big for a long time, but I wanted to make sure that one day a tree would stand there again. After that, I decided to have a little bit of fun and rub salt in Karen's wounds at the same time. Most of the money went into savings, but a small percentage of it went into improving the house and buying some new amenities. This included a nice patio deck for the backyard where we could grill and eat outside without having to be on the grass. Another one was a big outdoor trampoline for my kids who had been asking for one for a while. All in perfect view for Karen to see and become more jealous of, as she had no choice but to look at it. We did not go crazy, but it was just enough to make it so that Karen seemed to have a constant sour face whenever we would see her. Now, as far as her house was concerned, that was even better in my opinion. They had the tree removed and I could tell that they needed some serious work done on both the roof and having a small section of the house rebuilt. The only issue was that after the money they had to pay me every month, the courts worked out a payment plan because most people won't have the full amount right away. They did not have much left. They ended up having to get a very basic and cheap job done to get their house fixed. To be honest, it looked even worse considering it was just a section of the house, so it really stuck out to anybody looking at the house. Imagine an adult drawing a picture of a house and then a 3-year-old toddler deciding they wanted to help and draw some of it. You'd be able to tell right away the part the 3-year-old did, and that is the best comparison I can come up with for their house. I knew that Karen was embarrassed and over the months kept having small bits of work done on the section. Nothing worked out though, and it was clear it needed to be fully redone, but they did not have the money. I did not feel bad at all because they really did all of this to themselves. Karen made a partial attempt to get revenge on me by telling neighbors that I sued her for all her money and her kids were gonna starve. The thing was that since she had a reputation of being entitled, nobody was gonna believe her side of the story. They wanted to ask me and I had no issues telling them exactly what happened. That she destroyed my tree and caused it to fall on her own house. And that I did sue her for the tree and refused to pay for damages that she obviously caused on my property. Everybody believed me over her, and her attempt at getting revenge back at me failed. Instead, she would try to avoid me at every single turn, and when she did see me, it was with a sour face. On the other hand, I chose to act extremely friendly whenever I saw her and wave and talk about how nice the weather was. It was hilarious because the nicer I was, the angrier she seemed to get. I expected her to just yell at me or something, but that never happened. And yeah, Ripe Stars, you could say in the end OP killed Karen with kindness, which is obviously the best way to deal with an entitled Karen, at least in this story. Either way, if you like these longer entitled people stories, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe even post a comment if you want to support me. Thank you so much. And the next one is a story from r/amIthebutthole. So, when my husband and I were looking at houses, we found this great one with a pool in the backyard. Normally, it would have been out of our price range, but this one was a great deal. The reason why was because of one of the neighbor's children had drowned in the pool last summer. I know it's really morbid, but my husband and I discussed it and we decided we could look past it. I mean, we could never otherwise afford anything like it. It was big enough that all of our kids could finally have their own bedrooms. When we had moved in, the pool was empty and we did not see the point in filling it since at the time it was too cold to go swimming anyway. Since it's getting hot out now, we decided to finally fill it last week. Our kids had a great time swimming and we were having fun laughing and playing games. Later though, my husband was confronted by our neighbor, the one whose kid died, saying that the sounds of kids playing in the pool was traumatizing to his family and that we were horrible for letting our kids play in that pool after what happened. Since then, we have learned from an online post that several other people in the neighborhood similarly feel that we are being insensitive by letting our kids play in the pool. Many of them thinking that the right thing to do would have been to get rid of the pool or fill it up. Even considering it all though, we don't really want to get rid of our pool. We never had a pool before, but now we are really enjoying it and our kids do too. More info, we have noticed a lot of comments are telling us to put in a fence. We already have a tall fence that is completely solid, not see-through, and we always keep the gate locked. Also, the child in question died while swimming during a pool party. Comment number 1, not the a-hole. I can understand how those sounds could be traumatizing to the family who lost the kid, but it's really not reasonable to expect that pool to never be used again. And also, calling you horrible for using your own pool is completely out of line, even if they are grieving. I hope you can come to some kind of agreement that can respect their feelings, but in the end, it's your pool in your yard and it's not anyone else's business if you use it or not, regardless of what your neighbors think about it. Comment number 2, not the a-hole. If they wanted the pool filled in, they should have bought the property and done it. Leaving it empty is a hazard as well. What if the kids were playing around it and fell in and hit their head? It's not their property. If it's a sore spot for them, they should move. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I would agree with this. Obviously, OP and his family are not the a-holes for using the pool that is on their private property. However, then again, I can understand the neighbors and how difficult it must be for them, but seriously, they have no legal recourse and probably also no moral recourse to really tell OP what to do. Maybe they can come to some kind of agreement, but honestly, I'm not sure what even to do there. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think about this, whether OP is the a-hole or not. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. This one is titled Revenge on a Scammer. First and foremost, this did not happen in the US. Some events might be pursuable up there, but down here it was mostly no man's land regarding the kind of scams I fell for. For the sake of this story, here in no man's land we used the top-level domain NML. My wife is a nurse. Back then, in the early 2000s, she worked in an ICU of a relatively exclusive and therefore expensive hospital. Specifically, she had to care for patients that had undergone cardiac surgery. At the same time, I was working for a small company that was going out of business. The owners were retiring, we had not secured any important contracts lately, and in my country you have to pay for employee severance unless you file for bankruptcy. So they decided to shut down where they still had enough cash to pay our severances. One day my wife calls me and tells me about this gentleman in his late 50s that had been on the verge of passing away, and after that close call he was so grateful and stuff. We will call him Benny Lowy. This gentleman happened to work in electronic imports, which gave him access to incredibly convenient deals. Long story short, he was so grateful he could sell us an LCD TV, a store demo unit that had been used just once, and we would need to pay like 1/4 of its retail price. As long as we kept it quiet because he was risking his relation with the brand. This caught me off guard. I said yes and she paid. Anyway, the only TV in the house had been a wedding present and weighed over 100 pounds. We were eager to replace it. I was naive, I know, but I thought being her patient she knew all personal data from this guy, so it seemed unlikely he would target her for a scam. His father was a known businessman, now retired and approaching his 80s. Mr. Lowy Sr. was well respected in his community and would not have let his son wreak havoc. Also, my wife had acquaintances in common with Benny's brother, a known doctor of another hospital. Christmas was approaching. She asked Benny, who had already been discharged and back home, for advice regarding the present she wanted to give me. Which was a phone. He hooked her up with the best she could think of. Now, I cannot remember the exact model, but it was the Sony Ericsson flagship and it was not yet offered by local carriers. He had access to it because of his status as a local representative for said brand. She went with it and paid. The job position I've set my employer was shutting down, so just for the sake of it, she asked Benny if he knew of someone needing an IT guy. Of course, he said. I will meet your husband at this place tomorrow. And there I was in a gas station, uptown, and he pulled over in a luxury car. Mr. Lowy was a normal-looking guy, used a cane and had a noticeable knee or hip pain. We sat down in the gas station coffee shop and he told me about a mid-management position reporting to him in a mining company I had barely heard about. He coached me on what I should say in the upcoming job interview. We spoke about salary. I was dazzled. Wait, mining? Didn't you say he was into imports? He was that kind of guy you cannot pause to question, because he had already thrown something extra to the mix and this position had a better paycheck than the one I was being laid off. In the next days we had a few phone calls, stuff looked promising. I had already been laid off. We agreed he would pick me up on December 24th and he would introduce me to senior managers as the recommended help desk junior manager. So I woke up extra early, put on my best suit and waited in the front yard. Hours went by. I had planned to be back before noon to arrange stuff for that night's dinner because my parents were coming over. After calling him repeatedly, he told me he had been assaulted and robbed. "They took my cane and broke it on my knee," he wailed. Poor guy, I told him to forget about my interview for the time being. No, I promised you, I will make it up to you." Of course, since he had been injured, he was not able to deliver the items my wife bought from him. That night my mother asked me about the new job. I could not bring myself to tell her about the delay. I told her it was going fine. That night I googled him. Nothing showed up except for some awards in the Imports and Customs Associations of whatever. He called me to reschedule our interview. December 31st, again, picture me in my best suit outside my house on a summer morning. Of course, he did not show up. When I finally reach him, he tells me when his car had been stolen last week, they took his wallet too, which these thugs eventually dropped during another robbery, so now he had been detained as a suspect for that. He had not been able to pick the imported electronics on the customs office, so they had them moved to another custody unit where it would take a couple of weeks to retrieve. That night we went to my parents for New Year's Eve and my mother asked me for the new job. "It's all fine," I said. I Google him again, this time with variations regarding his name or the supposed company he was setting me into. Not much showed up, nothing shady. The next call was like a week later. He told me that because he was being involved in a police investigation, this mining company had fired him. But this was actually good because now I was going to be interviewed to take his position as IT manager. This meant double my former paycheck and securing a position that would be a leap forward in my career, so I don't ask many questions, I was just grateful. All those delays in the end would pay off. This situation, as you have already figured out, went on and on for weeks. My interview never happened, the electronics never arrived. We had lost our money, our time, our Christmas, our hopes, and I was still unemployed and had not been applying for job offers since I had this one allegedly secured. I texted him somewhere in between. I texted him, "Why are you doing this to us?" He texted back, "If I wanted to, you have nothing on me. But if you stick with me, you will be rewarded tenfold." Cue in, the detective time went by. Eventually my wife overhears from a coworker about this patient in another hospital she was working at. Some nurses do work part-time at other hospitals. She had fell for it too, but her husband was a detective, so a few hours later we were filling him in the details of the scam we fell for. Asking around, he found a third nurse scammed by this guy. Soon enough he was detained, this time for real, and admitted to have been scamming people due to an impromptu invented mild dementia. This detective talks him into an off-court deal in which he gave us back every cent, but not my time nor hopes, in exchange for us not pursuing any legal action. This was a decent deal because us, having failed to make a written agreement on any of these purchases, had at most a weak claim to our money. By the way, the money with which he paid us he had to borrow from this father and some from his brother, the doctor. Remember, this did not happen in the US. This agreement is actually completely legal down here, so I made a block. This part I rewrote to clarify events and consequences on our legal system. I could not go for any further legal action, but there was not a non-disclosure agreement whatsoever. And then I thought, what could prevent other people falling into this scammer's lies? Well, perhaps some Google results. I was in a unique position to tell my story without risking a legal backlash, so I created a blog on WordPress.com, think something like BennyLoeyTheScammer.wordpress.com. It was a single post in third person telling my story. The site's admin, me of course, closing words were, "Has it happened to you?" In the following days, that post's comments had a dozen stories much like mine. For each comment that deserved to be a story of its own, with due permission from its author, I turned those to a post with a brief intro. A testimony from Javiera from X City. Each one eventually had comments and so on. Since civil action court filings as opposed to criminal courts are public in my country, you can dig into ongoing class actions and recent settlements. I found out 7 years later that he tried suing the contact for WordPress.nml, our local fictional TLD, on the grounds of undermining existing past and potential activity for the plaintiff. I would say that part is true. To this day, if you Google for Benny Lowy, that blog will be the first result. And it has been for the last 15 years. The case of course was dropped, but he took it to appeals and then to Supreme Court. There is another entry filed under a different local court, promptly dismissed, and whose expedient closes with his lawyer apologizing to Automatic.com for any past or future inconveniences related to this case, and whose verdict rules Benny Lowy had to pay also for the sued party attorney's fees. There is a third suit. It was filed by his former lawyer, to whom he had not paid for the former civil actions. I was tempted then and there to set a post on this blog saying, if I wanted to, you have nothing on me. However, I have never attempted to let him know who is doing this, and I feel sorry for him, but every time I consider taking the blog down, I log in again. Today I did after 4 years, and see, he is still doing it. Those comments I turned into posts, of course, even knowing that I'm legally covered. The fact that I have not ever been contacted tells me he has done this to so many people we would not know where to start. All of his victims or scam targets are people in a vulnerable moment of their life or a rough patch. Unemployed guys, small startups looking for an angel investor, small branch salespeople pursuing a promising commission. Those who have in time reached a compensation or agreement, it is because Benny's now ancient father had to chip in. From what they say, this brother has gone no contact, but it is still the one they go to before suing. Most of the commenters leave their email addresses, and I have known of a few that have teamed up with each other and succeeded in legal actions, but even if they hadn't, they still have a place to rant, and their rants are still the first result in Google if you look for him. Perhaps this is not a revenge, but it is my story. And yeah guys, let me know what you think about this story in the comments. I gotta say, I hoped for a little more of a revenge story, but it was still an interesting read. Thank you very much for listening. I hope to see you again tomorrow.